The challenge was to cover more and more of the body in steel plates. The problem was that early processes of iron production only yielded small blocks, which in turn were hammered into small plates. The great breakthrough came in the 14th century. They mastered the technique of temperature control, which had been an inherent problem in the running of larger furnaces. Now, larger furnaces meant larger plates. This was a seismic change that led to a unique European achievement, an exoskeleton of full plate armour. The arms race was at full pace. Now, craftsmen in the armour-producing heartlands of Augsburg and Milan began supplying Western Europe with vastly improved defences. The large plates of steel could be fashioned into elaborate shapes. For the first time, anywhere in the world, the human body could be encased in steel from head to toe. And the sight and sound of the medieval battlefield was forever changed. The knight was not a self-sufficient warrior. He needed tremendous logistical resources to put him in the field. Not least of all, he couldn't even put his armour on his own. He needed his squire. And so, Richard, if you could help me arm. There's a manuscript, a 15th century manuscript, which tells us the order in which these things go on, and we start with the feet. There were various styles of armour. This is a copy of one from about 1480, the late medieval period, and it's German Gothic. And you can see how it sort of echoes Gothic arches in churches with these glorious fluted lines here. If you pop that on my back. Yep. Okay. The other main style of armour was Italian. And this was much less fussy, much plainer, with smooth surfaces, nonetheless tremendously elegant. And it was really a fashion preference, a style preference, as to whether a knight went for the Gothic style or the Italian style. Okay. Although with practice the squire would be able to get his master's armour on very quickly, nonetheless, it does take time, and a knight would have to be ready for battle long before battle lines were drawn. So now I'm fully armed. I'm encased in this exoskeleton, my own private world. There's enormous sensory deprivation. My vision is impaired. I can hear the sound of my own breath, but I can't hear everything that's going on in the battlefield. It's quite claustrophobic. My breathing is impaired, and yet I feel safe. Plate armour was soon put to the test. In 1337, England laid claim to the crown of France. It started a century of conflict that drove the arms race to a new intensity. When you think of the 100 Years' War, you tend to think of three famous battles, of Edward III at Crécy, of Henry V against incredible odds at Agincourt, or Joan of Arc at the siege of Orléans. But today, I've come here to the little market town of Verneuil in northern France in search of another great battle, much less written about, but a battle of epic proportions, an extraordinary battle, and a battle in which the crash of armour played a crucial role. In the Hundred Years' War, English military tactics relied heavily on one weapon, the longbow. A well-trained archer could shoot up to 18 arrows per minute. And when deployed in their thousands, longbowmen could decimate opposing forces of cavalry and infantry. At short range, the impact of the bow was particularly lethal. Capable of piercing even plate armour, as the French knights had discovered to their cost on the fields of Crécy and Agincourt. But in 1422, the great warrior Henry V died, and his 9-month-old son became king. Henry V's younger brother, the war veteran John of Bedford, took charge of his possessions in France. Sensing an opportunity to recover lost lands, the French challenged him to battle at Ivry, 50 miles north of Verneuil. The English army was ready for the fight. Their armour donned, their swords sharpened, and arrows prepared in their thousands. But their enemy didn't make it to Ivry. They changed direction and headed south to Verneuil, where they rendezvoused with massive reinforcements. French commanders had long relied on the cavalry charge. But the deadly power of the longbow, particularly when shot within a 20-metre killing zone, made knights and horses highly vulnerable. What the French needed was an invincible cavalry force. So they hired 2,000 Italian mercenaries equipped in the very latest armour technology. The best impression we can get of the sort of armour they were wearing at Verneuil is a rare example in the Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow. Here, Tobias Capwell looks after the Avant armour. It is the oldest surviving, near-complete Italian armour anywhere in the world.
What we're looking at here, Mike, are pieces of an Italian full-plate armour dating from about 1440. One of the most important things to appreciate about a fine quality plate armour like this was that it was specially made for the individual. Mm-hmm. This was about fitting it to the individual's body down to the very millimetre.
Bespoke tailoring.
Absolutely. It's properly made and properly fitted. It doesn't impede the movement of the warrior. He has to fight the enemy. He can't be fighting his own equipment as well.
This is the only surviving image of the Italian cavalry dispatched to Verneuil. It's from about 50 years after the battle, and so the artist has represented the armour of his own day. Even so, it's a stirring image of massed ranks of mounted knights, each in their custom-built armours. Perhaps the most essential piece of a knight's armour is his helmet. And at the Wallace Collection in central London, there is a very rare example from the best workshops of Milan. It's kept in the care of curator David Edge.
We have here a very fine Italian bassinet, made in about 1390, 1400, but I think perfectly usable, carrying on being used on the field of battle into the 1430s and 1440s. Camail of mail to protect the neck and shoulders.
Which is exactly the sort that might have been used at Verneuil.
Oh, yes.
Because it's perfect for going into arrow storms with this steep snout, arrows would glance off here. But it does give me limitations in vision. Again, it's added protection, but because the sights are brought forward, so there's no risk of an arrow, even if it jammed there, it wouldn't quite reach the eyeball, it does limit my vision.
So if I was to put my hand here...
I would perceive movement that far out. Great advantage of this, of course, is I can bring this up, I can breathe, I can get some oxygen in, quickly drop it down again, or I can make a quick scout of the battlefield to see where any dangers may be before I ride into them.
Whatever the particular design of a helm, the key issue is the trade-off between protection and vision.
When walking into an arrow storm or against the couched lances of mounted knights, I would certainly keep my visor down, giving me maximum protection, even though I've got slightly limited vision. But once I've closed to the tight press of hand-to-hand combat, then it clearly is going to put me at a disadvantage. I would rather trade off the protection the visor gives me with being able to have peripheral vision, being able to keep the maximum number of enemy in my eye line. Now obviously I can never actually see behind me, which is why I believe knights would fight in pairs, so my right-hand man would be guarding my back as we closed with the enemy. The other advantage is I can drop the bever plate as well and allow myself to breathe more. Once I'm in hand-to-hand fighting, it's huge exertion and I need a lot of oxygen. So again, I'm going to trade off that protection to be able to breathe, to be able to see and take my chances.
At the Battle of Verneuil, there would come a moment when English fortunes depended on their ability to slug it out in armour.